Perfect. Okay, great. Um, okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our seventh. This is our additional talk, our final talk in the series. I must tell you, it's really been delightful spending time with you, getting to know you. I hope it's been a learning experience for everyone. Last week, the topics that I wanted to talk about, I didn't feel that I'd have the right amount of time to do this. So we decided to split it up over two and have an extra session. I'm going to talk to you about this when we're done, but I'm going to ask you all to be ambassadors for the notion of parenting and learning about these things. I really hope that you found it to be a transformational experience. That's what this was all about. And I've always felt, Ami bina li gevura, that with wisdom comes strength. And I really hope you found this helpful, and you'll find tonight helpful. Okay, so module 7, just be. You'll see later on what that means and be happy with us. Here are the main topics that we left over from last week. Be a parent who gets it. If you see that image on the right side, that's that image is the bottom of an iceberg. And the big idea of that was that we know that this is what a full iceberg looks like. We know that only a small bit of the iceberg is visible on top. And one of the things that we've been talking about throughout was what you see as a supervisor and what you learn about only if your kid confides in you as a mentor. Just very briefly, and if anyone's new, you're welcome aboard. All the previous classes are on YouTube. I encourage you to go have a look. But one of the things we talked about a lot at the beginning was the difference between a supervisor and a mentor. A supervisor is someone who lays down rules, and that's very important. But really, that has a shelf life, similar to what we learned about Rav Wolbe, Zatzal, his theory on Zriya Ubinyan, building and planting. Building is inorganic, planting is more organic, and it has legs to it. It stays around a lot longer. And I've been encouraging all of us to think about our role more as a mentor, although we do need supervisory stuff. A mentor is someone that doesn't have a shelf life. Quite to the contrary, when I say shelf life, meaning if all you're doing is supervising, when your child grows through adolescence, you're going to find it much more difficult to really mentor them, to help them with it. If you were just the one setting the rules, now you're not setting rules anymore. Whereas if you transition and become a mentor, that really lasts for a lifetime, and it's a much a deeper, more meaningful relationship. And this was just a powerful image to me, because it just speaks to the fact that what parents see typically is only the tip of the iceberg, as the proverbial tip of the iceberg, and that you'll get as a supervisor. You'll get to see that stuff. But there's so much that you don't get to see. The bottom of the iceberg, what's hidden, whether it's addiction of sorts, or kids getting into trouble, or theological questions, faith questions, all of it. You don't get to see that if you're just supervising. If the child's behaving and they're doing what they're supposed to, on the outside, you won't notice it. And again, if you're mentoring, it's a different experience. So I want to talk about parents who get it. We did touch it briefly in previous classes. I want to dig deeper into that. I want to share the tools to have you effectively deal with, we call the underwater stuff, meaning the things, when I refer to underwater, those things that, the issues of universal issues of parenting, children, teenagers, that you might not, pick up right away. And hopefully, again, we'll find this, to be something of meaning. And this is a real tough one. Okay, number 3, and I am going to spend time on it: how to parent a child who disappoints you and even sometimes breaks your heart. And I really, really, really think this is an important thing. um, and, you know, for those of you who have children who are not in that category, I think it's important that you learn about to appreciate what you have. And for those who are, and you never know where these things come along life, you know, along our journey of life. So, you know, I think it's important to be prepared. Okay, so we started, remember, this was a slide that we've shown quite a bit about Ani Bina Li Gevura. With wisdom comes strength. I gave an example of getting an electric shock. Someone who gets an electric shock who comes from a developed country knows what it is. Has pain, understands it. Someone from a third world country who's not exposed to electricity has the exact same shock when they come out of the shower, if they touch an appliance, but they don't know what happened. And the bewilderedness just gets them disoriented. And the supervisor, how would a supervisor and a mentor respond to those questions? And here on the bottom, what age does your role as a supervisor fade, and what age does a mentor, which we spoke about earlier. Last week, we posed 4 scenarios. Scenario number 1, we took care of. It was about someone who was doing well and just fell off the table. Chas v'shalom, just an immediate, very, very significant decline. And as we spoke about last week, this is generally speaking trauma related. And we spoke about the importance of being a bedrock for the kids, of providing the lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, so the other scenarios, again, follow my cursor, please. Here, scenario 2, we're trying to separate our 11th grade son from a group of bad friends. Needless to say, we haven't been successful. What do we do with that? Scenario 3, our son's been drinking at Shalom Zachar's. Shalom Zachar is a Friday night party when a baby boy is born. We confronted him and he said, I'm not addicted and I'll stop drinking if you allow alcohol at home. Okay, so if you bring the alcohol at home, then I won't do it. But should you bring alcohol at home? Remember we spoke about a third category? This is where this fits in. A third category, again, to refresh your memories, we said that if you're supervisors, then your answer is yes or no. But if you're really going to mentor your children and you're going to want them to talk to you, there are going to be a lot of gray issues. And I encourage you to think about a third category, meaning it's yes, no. And in the middle, I'm really not thrilled about it, but I'm glad we're talking. Does that drinking fit into that category? I'm going to have some serious discussions about that. And scenario 4 ties really a little bit to what we spoke about, you know, parents who disappoint or break your heart, they leave observance. What do we do? What do the other kids say? And, you know, this is really complicated. I have an approach that I have found over 30, 40 years to be effective, and I'll be glad to share with you. So back to scenario 2 for a moment. Bad friends. So what's an effective way to deal with it? And most of us raising adolescents or kids, you know, have this challenge with, you know, one of our children or more of our children. It's certainly very, very normal. Question is in terms of, you know, how do you deal with this? So I have found that the don'ts are easier to talk about than the do's. Usually you say do's or don'ts. Here's what you should do. Here are 3 things that you really should not do. Number 1, don't label them. Please don't go ahead and say, you know, that those friends are, just fill in the blanks, you know, for lesser character, however you're going to say it. The fact of the matter is that, and it doesn't mean that they love you any less, but usually if adolescents have to pick between friends and families, friends and parents, they're usually going to pick their friends, at least in the short term. Again, that doesn't mean they don't love you. It's a peer group. It's, you know, there's a lot of pressure that comes along with that. And it's part of the disengagement from home. So if you wind up labeling one of the kids, and or a group of the children, you know, there's not much in life that I'm certain about, but I'm pretty certain that they're going to go and tell their friends what you said about them. And you just developed a whole bunch of enemies when you need every friend you can get. So, I really don't think that this is a winning strategy. Don't label them. It's okay if you say something like a little bit of a do there. It's okay if you say, look, um, I'm sure, I'm sure that they're great kids. I don't know them very well. Um, I'm sure that they're great kids, but when the two of you are together, there's a negative energy. That's fine. That's a nice way to say it. Um, are you making each other better, or are you dragging each other down? Talk about it more in global terms. It's okay to say that, but think about it really carefully. Don't give ultimatums. Don't say, well, if you don't drop this person, then just fill in the blanks of whatever punishments. Not a good idea. And don't rush. Remember, we spoke a few times about collecting information. Don't an answer key. Try to figure it out. Ironically, one of the things that I've noticed over the years, I really mean this. Sometimes I'll get contacted if I know several sets of, if there's a clique or a group that are getting into trouble and there's 4 or 5 kids there. Sometimes I'll get contacted by 2 parents of kids in the group, each of them saying that the other child is dragging their kid down. Okay, so you never know really what the real story is. Usually kids hang out with people like them, and especially with I've noticed that especially if it's a if your son has a girlfriend, not necessarily the other way, it happens sometimes, but very often when the boys are wild. Now, I'm not recommending that, if you're in a more Haredi community where the boys don't hang out with girls, I'm not suggesting that you break the norms, but if your child is getting into trouble and they're hanging out with a girl, you might find out that that girl has got him off drugs or got him to stop doing crazy things. So you never really know. By the way, if you remember, we were talking about goals. One of the goals about having the kids at home, having the children at home allows you to see what's going on. That's another benefit of having everything at home, creating the type of home. Remember, we said there's a cost to it. It's going to cost you money and time and cleanliness and privacy. But one of the great values, I didn't discuss it at the time, but one of the great values is that you get to see their friends. And even if you do decide that, yes, this is worth a conversation like that, at least you're having an informed conversation. You're not just coming and saying, I heard my friend said that this boy or girl is no good, So it's just such an uninformed thing to say. Whereas if you know the kid, you say, look, he really seems like a nice kid. It's nice to have him at home, but I notice whatever, something of that nature. Some research, remember I just mentioned earlier, it's normal for teens to choose friends. Before I told it to you, just anecdotally, you look at the research, they begin to enjoy the company of their friends more and spend more time. That is, you see, they share their worries, their secret ambitions. Again, on bottom, you have references for it. I'm a big believer in research. A lot of things I do say anecdotally that I notice or that, but it's always comforting. It's helpful to see that there actually is research, and it's more validating if you're going through this as a parent and you're getting disoriented and upset that your child is favoring their friends. This is normal. This is really very normal. We had the example, remember this one? We had in an earlier talk, we spoke about a child didn't want to daven with his father anymore, and it turned out that he was 13 years old and starting adolescence. Here you can look, great thinkers on the left, see it, Freud, Piaget, Maslow. These are folks who've studied this very carefully. And perspective to be able to look into the development and puberty, how all of these things come and affect how their judgment and decision making and all of this comes in. So again, if you want to dive deeper, I gave you some sources to work with. So again, closing that one out, if your child is getting into friends that you're concerned with, find out more about them. Don't be impulsive and say something. Never say things that put those other friends down. I really think that that's a bad idea. Rather, be more strategic about it. Think if you can get eyes on the kid by encouraging your son, the daughter to bring their friends over, that's certainly better. But it's a very difficult thing. I think I mentioned earlier when I first started dealing with teens at risk in the late 90s, mid 90s, I did a very informal survey of 95 boys, 13 to 21, some very, yeshiva-oriented, young Talmidei Chachamim scholars, to all the way across the kids who were no longer religious and getting into terrible trouble. I did it during the summertime, like not before COVID, I actually went around with the kids, hung out, and I asked them a bunch of questions. What do you think the greatest challenges of today are? Well, and then I asked them 5 questions of the most common questions that I was getting. And I asked the kids, what would you tell a parent if a parent is complaining, tells me, Yakov Horowitz, my son's not davening, what do you think I should tell the parent to do? And I did a few things like that, not davening or getting into whatever. One of the things I asked them is about bad friends. Every single kid said, tell the parents not to bother, it's not going to work. That was the only thing that there was unanimity on. Everybody said, every one of the kids I asked said that this is not a winning strategy. Okay, so let's talk about the drinking and starting to deal with some of the underwater stuff that we're talking about. And we'll start with be a parent who gets it. And we did speak about this earlier briefly. I want to drill deeper into this. And when I say a parent who gets it, that means that your ears are to the ground. You try to know what's really going on in your lives. And again, having them at home hanging out helps you do that. Gives you a much better, a view on things. Try to find out what's going on in technology, what's going on in their lives. I'm going to share with you, this is a remarkable story, an absolutely remarkable story. I didn't want to write a Rosh Yeshiva who gets it, but that's what I meant. Rosh Yeshiva is the dean of a boys' high school and post-high school beis medrash. And I spoke at an Aguda convention and to a group of Rabbanim, a group of senior Agudas Yisrael Rabbanim, rabbis. And there were members of the Miatzis Gedolei HaTorah, or the leading body of Rosh Yeshiva in the Haredi, in the yeshiva world. And I mentioned at the time that I found out that in 1998 that there were Orthodox kids selling drugs in Flatbush and Borough Park. Not that the other neighborhoods didn't have it, but those were the 2 that I found out about. And I was obviously very rattled, and I went to a meeting of the Gedolim, and I asked the question if I should report them to the authorities, the dealers, the kids, the actual mules, the kids who were selling. After the meeting, a very senior, I will not say his name, but I dare say that many or most of you would flip if you found out who this was. So this very distinguished, tremendous Torah scholar, the tremendous Talmid Chacham, came over to me after the meeting. He pulled me aside. I was in my 30s. This person had more than a few decades on me. And he said, Rabbi Yakov, tell me, do I have to worry that my Talmidim are using drugs? That's what he said. Do I have to worry that my Talmidim are using drugs? So I said, yeah, if they're selling it in the neighborhood, you got to worry. And it was fascinating. He said, look, I'm not arguing with you, Rabbi Yakov, and I'm not suggesting that you're making this up. I just want to understand what you're saying. Are you telling me not just the kids who left school or aren't doing well, you're telling me the bachrim, the young men, that post-high school, that I'm learning a tzais with, a complicated commentary on Talmud and the Gemara. He says, the bachrim that I'm learning a tzais with, I have to worry that they're doing drugs. Tell me, if it's so, but tell me, is that what you mean? So I said, yeah. So he stepped back. It was an absolutely unforgettable conversation. I remember it like it happened yesterday. And So I told him, I said, look, Rebbe, I said, Shiva, I just want to explain my thinking. I said, when I was a kid, there were 2 or 3 degrees of separation between, I was a very wild kid. None of my friends did drugs. We just didn't. So like, I was 2 or 3 degrees of separation from someone who was using. I said, every one of your Talmidim, every one of the Rosh Yeshiva's Talmidim knows someone who's using. So that means it's within their wheelhouse. If it's within their Nekudas Habechira, Rav Dessler and others talk about. I mean, Nekudas Habechira means at what point is there are they vulnerable? So it's within their Nekudas Habechira. So he asked me, so what do you recommend, Rabbi Yakov? And I said, you know me by now, or those who've been classes, the 6 classes, you know, I speak my mind, I'm a straight shooter. I said, listen, does the Rosh Yeshiva know what marijuana smells like? I promise you, this is what it sounded like. This was the conversation. I said, does the Rosh Yeshiva know what marijuana smells like? So he looked at me. I said, does Rosh Yeshiva know what it looks like when a young man is coming off cocaine high? So I said, if the Rosh Yeshiva doesn't know, so how are you going to know if your Bachar are doing drugs if you don't know what marijuana smells like? So I told him there's a sergeant in the precinct, in the 70th precinct, that I became very friendly with. He gave me an education on drugs. I would recommend that I'll send him up to the Rosh Yeshiva. And he said, set it up. And then I said, listen, the Rosh Yeshiva doesn't have to go. 2 young rabbeim in the yeshiva have to know what's going on. They need to be able to go over to a kid who's, going like this, like he has a cold, take his glasses off and look him in the eye and see if his pupils are dilated, that he's using cocaine. So I said, 2 people have to know. And the yeshiva said, that's a great idea. I have the right people. Listen what he said. He said, but it's going to be in my office. The meeting is going to take place in my office with the sergeant, and I want to be there. Why? Because this is what he said. If my children, if my Talmidim are vulnerable to this, then I need to know about it, and I don't want these young Rebbeim to think that it's dirty work that I wouldn't do myself. So that's how I encourage you as parents to think, to be real, and to think about what they're up to and what you need to do. This was just a fascinating story about folks who don't get it. This was in the 1990s. There was, you can look it up. If you look up these words, you'll see lots and lots of articles. There was Scarsdale was a very upscale neighborhood in Westchester County. And the kids had a party, an open house, which means it's not a real estate, parents go away and the kids party in the house. So they had an open house and the kids were vomiting and really in very bad shape. The cops came, a few kids were almost near death, and it led to a lot of reflection. And what they did was, I was a school principal at the time, and in Rockland County, and it was a very wise thing they did. Once they found out that it's really going on all over the suburbs, that the kids are binging on alcohol and marijuana and other drugs, so they commissioned a study to see what the drug use is like. And this was really fascinating. What they found was that the inner city drug use was going down, and the suburban drug rate was going up, which is, you would think, counterintuitive. The inner city still had a higher rate of kids using drugs, but it was trending down, and the suburbs were trending up. And the study found out that the inner city parents got it. They knew they had a drug problem. So when those kids left the house, mom or dad, but even if it was a single parent household and the parents were struggling and whatever it was, they said, you stay away from drugs. You better not do that stuff. So they got it. They spoke to the children about it. And that had a good effect. Whereas the folks in Scarsdale didn't get it. So they didn't speak to the kids about it. It wasn't Scarsdale, it was Rockland County where I live, and Putnam County, and I think they even did some of the counties in New Jersey. And that was a really powerful message because getting it meant that they got intervention, that they were looking at the kids, they were watching them for signs of drug use. That's what keeps kids out of trouble, when they get to a stage where they actually look at this. And I picked this from that article that was referenced here. Again, you can look it up yourself, the one in the New York Times. And This is what not getting it looks like, folks. This is all from the article. Okay, 600 kids were in a stupor from drink, and many of them were, a third of them, that means 200 kids were zoned out from screwdrivers, which is, alcohol and some orange juice or other things. And they had vodka sneaked from the parents' liquor cabinets and disguised in Poland Spring water bottles. Okay, folks, that's what it looks like when you don't get it. The kids are walking out of the house. I always tell parents on Purim, you see the kids with a Poland Spring bottle, don't think they're hydrating, okay? Assume that there's liquor. And, parents who get it mark their alcohol bottles. So these folks weren't aware of it. One set of parents, their kid was drunk, they sent the housekeeper. When they gave out punishment, some parents complained that they were worried about the college transcripts, okay? And he urged parents to be honest. This is what not getting it looks like. And hopefully the awareness that they built in Scarsdale did wind up, I believe that, on the other side of things, they were in a better place afterwards because they knew about it. So do you get it? I'm just throwing out some questions that kids will want to know from you. Is alcohol worse than a cigarette? In other words, what's more addictive or what's more dangerous? You can be sure that if your kid's drinking alcohol, that it's less than a cigarette. And if they're in cigarettes, they'll say cigarettes is less than alcohol. Is marijuana more addictive than cigarettes? Is it worse for you? Is vaping less harmful than cigarette smoking? I just got an email from one of the parents in our group asking me to talk about this, that children who was in this person's home, the parents wrote that the kid was negotiating. He said, I'll get a lower electronic e-cigarette, but I want you to pay for it because I'm dropping the more harmful stuff. And the parent wanted to know if they should spring for it. I said they should. But if the kid comes over and says, look, cigarette smoking is messy and dirty and vaping is cleaner, there seems to be less residue on the lungs. Obviously, the problem with that is that it's more addictive, and they might be able to get away with it. In other words, their friends will object less if they're vaping. Can you name 3 new apps that were created in the last month, in the last 6 months? These are questions around the subject of whether you get it or not. Okay, and that all plays into the question that we asked earlier about the kid wanting to drink alcohol at home with permission. This directly, the answers to these questions, if you're going to have conversations with your children, this is going to come up, and this knowledge base is something that you should be aware of. The truth is, this is my own experience, and I hear it from the kids all the time. They have way too much information, and much of it is wrong. And whether it's sex education, or whether it's information about drugs, or it's information about other harmful things that the kids might be doing, there's so much information out there that the kids get overwhelmed, and it's like trying to drink from a fire hydrant. And this is where parents, knowledgeable parents can be helpful, researching the answers to these questions, finding out what the newest apps are. If a kid comes to you and asks you, can I use Snapchat? That's not new at all. But, I would venture to say that some parents still don't know what that is. Or TikTok is something that just came out, more recently. If you're at my stage in life and your kids are all out of the house, like I always say, you can stay clueless, it's fine. You can keep your AOL address, it's fine. But if you have teenagers at home, you really need to know, I really encourage you to know the answers to these questions. So how to get it? Collect reliable information. I wrote how to get it and keep your capital. That means to keep the currency that you have without expending it on arguments. I'll explain a little bit more about what that means. But get reliable information yourself. Consider consulting with a professional yourself before speaking to kids. That means let's say you find out that your child is binging on phone use, they're on their phones all day. You think they might have a pornography addiction, or they might be, doing whatever. Educate yourself first. I would recommend that you talk to a professional before you speak to your kids, because then if you've had the time to speak to a professional, you will be able to have at least more intelligent answers to these types of questions. So do your homework in any way you can. You can speak to someone, don't bother speaking to a 35-year-old, but speak to someone that's 5 years older, 3 years older than your kids. If you want to know what they're doing in Israel or what they're doing in other things, and you want to find out about what's really going on, find out in any way you can. Don't say things that you don't know what you're talking about. It's okay not to know. It's okay not to know. In fact, you're not going to fool them. You can't fool teenagers. So if you don't know about substances, about the latest technology, please don't just say things. You heard that. Heard means your friends told you, or you read it somewhere, or you saw it somewhere. Don't say things that aren't accurate. It's better to say, I'm not that knowledgeable about it. And you look at what I wrote, number 4 here, offer to bring the child to a professional if they challenge you. Let's say a kid comes and tells you, come on, marijuana is nothing, stop it. It's less than, who dies from a marijuana overdose? People die from alcohol, from going into toxic shock from drinking alcohol. So is that true? It's okay. So go to a professional. I did it with one of our children that not, thank God, not for something so serious. It was cigarettes, and I went together with this child to Dr. Twersky. Said, of course, I'm not addicted. I can stop anytime. And we went together to Dr. Twersky, and it was actually a fascinating conversation. So, okay, I had connection to him. Fine. You might not be able to pull that off, but to go to somebody. Go to a professional together. You demonstrate humility. You say, look, you know your limitations. So do what you have to get it, but to keep your capital, not to argue. Generation Z, folks, there is such a generation gap in so many areas. Here it's about sexuality or other things like that. But the kids who are in their teens now have such a different approach to life. The research keeps showing that they're far, far more tolerant. They're less judgmental. Even their approach, let's say, to LGBT issues. And I'm not speaking about kids who are LGBT themselves. I'm talking about regular straight yeshiva guys. They're far more likely to be understanding than even people were 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And this affects everything. This is just the way it is. I see this in the Hasidic community also, believe it or not. This attitude of, listen, I'm not, and it doesn't mean they say it's okay or things, they're much more likely to think that, listen, I'm not judging someone. So make sure your information is correct, and understand it. So much of this is generational. Now, marijuana, let me give a simple example, okay? I'll start with an example from other people, and then I'll tell you where I messed up once, okay? So again, here's the cursor. Make sure your information is generationally correct. When you remain relevant, they'll listen to you in other contexts too. That means if you're saying things that your generation, that the kids today are on a different page, not only are you like, I wrote this in the positive way, but if they may ignore you, they might ignore you in more important contexts because you're not relevant, you don't get it, you don't understand their lives. I think this is a perfect example. Marijuana. When we were kids, again, I'll be 61 in a couple of weeks. Okay, so I grew up, in the 70s. So I was an adolescent in the 70s. Marijuana was like a big deal. It was like drug use. So it wasn't the same as heroin, but marijuana was a big deal. Marijuana was like considered a mini drug. Today, It's legal in so many states already. It'll soon probably be legal everywhere within 5, 10 years. The kids think it's like a cigarette, or maybe a little bit more. And they're more likely to argue about it if they are doing pot. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't drug test your kids and talk to them about it. Of course you should. But I'm talking about how they're thinking. If you come in, if you give them a talk that would have been relevant when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and you say marijuana, the next thing you know, marijuana is like heroin. Let's say you say something like this. It's drug. Now you could say, if you're more informed, you'll say it's a gateway drug. It's truthfully, it's not as harmful as heroin or other drugs, but it's a gateway drug. Very few people go to hard drugs without using this. That's an informed conversation. That's research-based that the children can identify with. Now, they'll tell you you're wrong. That's what they have to do. They're teenagers. But if you go and you use up all your capital on this and you're out of sync with the kids, I'm telling you, they just turn off. They say, you don't get it. They'll still love you, but they won't respect you about your knowledge that you're promulgating, you're telling them. Now, the Shachris thing was me. That happened with us. Our boys, our Kanenahar, they're now in their high 30s. Baruch Hashem, our two boys, mid to high 30s, and no, high 30s, both of them. And I grew up in Bell Harbor. There was a 7:00 minion, and there was a 8:00 minion, and it was like this. That they weren't minion factories in my days. Maybe in Yerushalayim, but not in the neighborhoods around here. So if you were a frum kid, if you were an Orthodox kid, you got up at either 7 or 8 and you davened with the minyan. That was it, period, end of story. My boys, when they were bar mitzvah and shortly thereafter, I started busting the chops. I was arguing when they went to shul late. It's late, what are you doing? Why are you sleeping so late? And then one of the kids said, hey, I said, what are you crazy? Who gets up at 9:30? What's the matter with you? And one of the kids says, my Rebbe davens at this minyan. I said, get out of here. I drove him down. He says, come down, drop me off. I went inside and I said, and yes, all the shiny Eden were there. All the, fine fellas were up there. So I dated myself. I used my capital, yelling, whatever, expressing myself to the kids. And I was wrong. I dated myself. And let's just get to the answer here, Dr. Twersky, and Beer, the question of that really came about. So again, let me sum up before we go. So the backstory is about this issue of drinking. Learn to get it. Find out what's going on. Do your homework. Don't be shy about going to a professional. Learn as much as you can. Keep your powder dry. Don't go ahead and jump ahead before you know things. And make sure that you're really relevant. And the question this guy had was, what should I do about the drinking? Should I bring it into the house? So my philosophy, my lovely wife, Odi, and I, we decided that we don't want the kids doing stuff behind our back. We told it to our boys, and we said that if you want beer in the house, tell me, and I'll buy it for you. But we're going to have a real conversation if I catch you drinking, behind somebody's house from a paper bag, So that's how we did it. So that fellow who asked about the wine, about the kids of the Shalom Zachar and the drinking, I would say that if it was in my case, I would say bring the stuff home and see to it that they don't run around to Shalom Zachars. Like this, you have supervision. I just want to mention that Dr. Twersky he was my Rebbe. He mentored me in all of this. He's a gadol in the field of addiction. He had a clinic in 1971 already. He was light years ahead of his time. He said that he felt that people shouldn't have alcohol at all at home. I didn't listen to him. I do things differently, but when I speak about this in public, I always mention what Dr. Twersky said out of respect for him. And I think that you should know what he said. But I didn't live my life like this. And I wanted the kids to be home, and that was the price I was paying. And here's another one, true story. So the kids, the two boys would give me their orders on Friday, and I went to 7-Eleven. If you're ever in Muncie, there's a 7-Eleven on the corner of College Road and Route 59, which is smack in the middle of town. It's hopping busy all the time, and I would go in on Friday, I'm the Manal Shlita, okay? I'm not just a civilian. I'm a principal of a yeshiva and an educator, whatever. And I went out with 2 6-packs of summer ale or whatever was on my list. And this was really hysterical. One of my kids says, Tati, you don't have to go to that 7-Eleven. And he told me some other places in the county that they sell beer that nobody would know about. And this was my response. I said, this is right for my family. I'm not embarrassed. I said, it's a value for me that I don't want you running around and drinking. And I'm willing, this is my cost. It's okay. Remember we spoke about a price for goals that you have? This was my price. And someone just shared with me today that they have wine at home and they encourage the teenagers to drink responsibly, and they learn, to satisfy their curiosity, not that they should have to run around drinking. In fact, that this person told me that kid came home and said that they were at a party with some other friends, and they said that they had horrible stuff. It was disgusting. The kids were drinking, wine or whiskey, and they had better stuff at home. So, they felt it was beneath them to go slumming and drink away from home. So the parent, some woman told me today that, this was a benefit to her. Okay, let's get to the last issue, and the very challenging one. I wrote about parenting children who disappoint you and break your heart. And a 19-year-old daughter is no longer Shabbos observant. She's our oldest. We're concerned about what the siblings will say, any suggestions, and let's really get into it. Okay, Ani Bina Li Gevura, something you've heard from me so many times. About wisdom comes strength. And, understanding this whole thing is really important. As it relates to being able to effectively deal with it. This is an article called Exit Interviews that I wrote about. An exit interview is like, if you leave the credit card company, or you leave a store where you were a customer, somebody will come after you and find out why you left. And I always encourage people, Rabbanim, especially rabbis and educators and parents, speak to the kids who are abandoning religion and find out what's going on with them. You're welcome to read this article. I'm working on something. I hope I'll be able to announce afterwards that we'll have a sharing platform where you can pose questions, and I'll be able to post some resources. But that's an article I wrote. You're welcome to look it up. Here is a very, very, very important thing when you start thinking about this specific situation here, scenario 4, with someone who's abandoning religion. So this isn't a research thing. This is just my own, my understanding of things. And I really think they are 2 completely different groups. I started speaking about this about 22 years ago. And people were bunching children who abandon religion. I don't like the term off the derech, just for the record. But I call them no longer observant. But people lump them into one category, and I think there's really 2 categories. One are people who are abandoning religion. In Hivrit, we say the ozvim dat. They live over, they abandon religion, but they have a great life. That's category number 1. They're moving forward. Look and see, they have a plan. They have a social network. They have friends. They're content with their lives. They're forward-looking. Everything's right, just God's not part of it. And you analyze what's causing the abandonment. This is one sug, one category. The second category, that they're not just leaving religion, they're leaving life. And that means they're self-destructing, they're not happy, they're cutting chas v'shalom or suicide attempts, they're not in school, they're not hopeful. I found, and my colleagues, we all concur that a vast, overwhelming majority of the Ozumet HaChaim group was trauma related, and therefore, if there is trauma, God forbid, if they were abused, or there was other trauma in their life, it's your job to make them whole. And I maybe a rabbi shouldn't say this, but the religion is not even on the table right now. You have a broken soul. You have a child who's broken, who doesn't have, Maslow would say, those lower levels. just don't even bother with the discipline, religion. Just get them whole first. Get them help. Get them those lower levels of Maslow, like we spoke about. Make sure their physical needs are there and their safety needs, and that they feel loved. Then you can talk about the other stuff. Maslow would say that religion is 5. And don't even, it's a waste of, remember we spoke about last week about, your car breaks down in a bad neighborhood, you're afraid for your life. You're not thinking about 5-year goals or religious stuff. You just don't have headspace for it. So this is really, really, really important. If you have a child in this category and you notice they don't hang up a sign, Zimut Chayim, that I'm leaving life, but look for these markers. Again, this is not something I've read anywhere. This is just my own observation, but as the older I get, the more I believe that this is absolutely true. So look for those markers. If your child is there, please, nothing else matters. You just make sure they're whole and they are taken care of. And then hopefully the rest of it comes. And what do you tell your other children in a case like this? You say, Yitzi, Aviva, they need our help right now. That they're in pain right now. We're looking away. It's the right thing to do. We're a family. We would do the same for you if you needed anything. And just so you know, this was the advice that I got from the Gedolim over the years. That's Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky Shlita. He's been our posek for 23 years. The very clear recommendation that I got consistently, not just from the Rosh Hashiva Rav Shmuel, is that this group, it's a life or death thing, and you see that they get whole. Please, I'm begging you, don't even bother with any of the other things right now, including if they're giving you an attitude. They can't take care of themselves right now. You have to help them. Just a humorous story, since it's such a heavy topic. When I first did a support group with parents whose kids abandoned religion, I did it in Brooklyn. We had about 30, 40 sets of parents. And you can imagine, it was very painful and very tense. And I told them this basically. And after we broke up, we had a very nice meeting. It was very positive. And then when we were breaking up, I asked the folks, I said, parents, is there anything I can do for you? I promise you. So one of the guys he apologized 12 times. I thought it was hysterical. He said, could we do this again, but can we hear this from a real rabbi? He told me that. He said, can I hear this from a real rabbi? And then he said, I didn't mean that. I said, I know exactly what you meant. Good question. Go for it. I brought a Rosh Hashiva that told him the same thing. But this is just, it's so important. Just some stories to really support what this looks like. It sounds abstract. It sounds like, come on, what does it really look like? What do you mean by this? So I'm going to point out some things that I saw that were real marks of excellence that you would call best practices in the business world. Udi and I were at a recovery Shabbos, a Shabbos retreat for people on addiction in Boca Raton. Wonderful Chabad Shliach runs it there. There for Shabbos, and obviously I was there as a volunteer, as a staff, whatever, so you don't ask any questions, you don't say anything, you don't ask anyone where they're from or what they're doing there. So one of the I would go from table to table, schmoozing, chatting with the people, trying to build relationships. And there was a very large Hasidic family, probably 20 members of the family, 3 generations. There were grandparents my age, and there were young married kids and grandchildren. And I didn't know anything. You look at them and you say, everyone's addicted, you can't help. You don't say anything and you keep everything confidential. But if your mind wanders, we're all human at the end of the day. But in my travels around the room, I walked by the table, and one of the young ladies, she said, I'm a daughter-in-law here. She said, you're probably wondering what we're all doing here. And she was sitting next to her brother. It so happens that he wasn't observant also, but this kid was not observant. And this woman told me, she said, we're not all addicted. She told me that I didn't say anything, of course. She said, "Mizenina mishpacha." I wrote those words in Yiddish. We're a family. And she said, the kid, whatever his name was, Yankee, he said, Yankee has a problem, we have a problem. And we're here to support him. It's as good as it gets. Folks, I'm sure that those parents were heartbroken and terrified and disappointed and all of the above. But they made a decision that all in, we're gonna, it was one of the nicest things I've seen over the years. That the parents just said, we're committed to our child. And she said it so naturally, another line that I heard at a Madregos, a Rosh Hashanah retreat. One of the kids would get up at meals and talk, and one of the kids got up there, a 17-year-old kid, and also, by the way, trauma victim, all trauma, and he was thanking his people at Madregos and his friends. He was sober for whatever, a few months at the time. So he just got up and, people were giving him encouragement. So he said something so profound. He said, and I want to thank my parents. And his parents were there, and he hugged them and, excuse me, I'm sorry, I promised myself I'm going to try not to get emotional. So this kid went over and his parents stood up and he hugged each of them. And he said, while I was going through my hell, he said this to everybody. He said, when I was going through my hell, people would ask me, how could you do this to your parents? And we could be forgiven for parents for thinking this way, or for, we gave birth to you, we raised you, we love you, how could you do this to us? So he said this, he says, people would come over to me, he says, your parents are going to drop dead from aggravation from this. And it was so funny because it was so natural. He turned to everyone, there were 500-600 people in the room. He turned around and he said, what are they, crazy? He said, people would tell me, he said, like, rhetorically, he said, like, people would ask me, how could you do this to your parents? He said, I can't even help myself. He's used some flowery language, some curse words. He said, I tried to kill myself twice. The kid said this. He said, I tried to kill myself twice. How could I worry about them? I couldn't take care of myself. But he turned around and he said, but you guys were always there for me. You guys were always there for me. And I'm certainly not suggesting that this is easy, but I wanted to give you a picture of what it looks like, that it is possible, and just a wonderful thing for parents to be able to do this, to tell your children, especially if they're Razumat HaChaim, we're here for the long haul, we're here for you, we love you, we support you. People who abandon religion, it's much more complicated. There are a lot more reasons. This was a survey that I did with about, I think, 50 or 60 formerly religious people. And I asked them what caused your abandoning religion? And people were allowed to answer more than one thing. And these are some of the answers that I got. Again, you can watch it. I'll have it up on YouTube. You can watch the film and the thing. You can watch and pick up the answers in greater detail. But you see, there really are a lot of reasons for this. The other ones are almost all trauma. But here, there really are many reasons. How old were you when you became non-observant? I asked them, one of the questions was, how long were you not observant before you came out and told people? And the average time was 3 to 5 years. So, there's a lot going on, and that's why talking to your children is so helpful. This was fascinating. I asked the kids, this was my survey of those 50 people, what advice would you give parents of no longer observant children? How would you advise, again, these are no longer observant adults, that were formerly from kids. What would they say? And just read what they wrote. These were their own words. I edited a few words just for clarity. Look at this, number 2. Don't say things like, what will the neighbors say, or your grandparents? It only distances them. Attempt kirov only if your argument is solid. Leave the kirov to others, just be a good parent. People make their own choices, accept him or her, never. Don't shut them out. This is what you're hearing from the customers, folks. Now, no one said this is easy. I'm just saying, don't reject your kid because he doesn't do what you want him to. He's a different person than you. Still love him. Don't be embarrassed and don't nag. Here, these are 3 pages. Really, mostly the same expressed philosophy. Again, easier said than done, but at least these are the best practices that we know anecdotally and we know work. Far more than having, far more than being stricter. This was an article that I wrote in Mishpacha magazine. Should we keep our at-risk kid at home? It was a question, and it was actual real letter sent to me by parents. I responded, obviously you can imagine what I wrote, that they should keep them at home. And I ended off with just an incredible Dvar Torah. We're running a little bit late, and I want to finish my content. It's a Dvar Torah about Yitzchak and Esav, and it's just a beautiful thought. Please, anybody reminds me, I'll be delighted to share it with you. I think it's an important Dvar Torah that you should hear about. But I just want to finish the presentation and then close it out and then start taking your questions. Bela is back in the control room. Thank you very much. So I just want to finish the presentation. And if your child is choosing a different path and they're not chayim, they're not leaving life, they're just leaving religion, there really are 2 choices. One of them, you can do the guilt thing. You can pressure them to do what you want them to, or you could provide them with bedrock. And, that hopefully will allow them to come back to religion on their own, or to have at least a relationship with you and with the rest of the family. And, obviously, where I feel these are really the 2 main choices. Either you guilt them, you distance them, you let them know that you're disappointed and all of that, or you just offer them support. I saw such a beautiful interpretation. It says that the short Divrei Torah I'll give you now, the other, that 1 or 2 long ones will leave for later during Q&A. I saw such a beautiful thought. It's not literal translation, but our Chachamim tell us, our sages tell us that Yakov Avinu's son Yosef was sold by his brothers as a slave. He went down to Egypt. He stayed in the house of a fellow named Potiphar. Potiphar's wife was a beautiful woman, and she tried to seduce Yosef. So it says that he went to the house Lasas Malachtai to do his work, and Rashi says he really wanted to have relations with her because she was bothering him all the time and she was being very suggestive. And it says he saw Demus Yukna Shel Aviv. He saw an image of his father, and that stopped him from sinning. So the classic translation is that Yosef saw Yaakov's image. I saw such a beautiful shot. Yosef saw Demus Yukna means his. It's like a pronoun. It doesn't say which person. So another interpretation I saw was that Yosef saw Yaakov's image of Yosef. That when he saw the Musti Yokno Shel Aviv, it didn't only mean that he saw his father's image, which mean, the collective teachings, everything they learned from his father. But Yosef knew his father got him a special garment. And when he had the dreams and the brothers were ridiculing him, Yaakov was watching. He said, my father believes in me. He trusts me. So he saw Dumusta Yuknai, he saw his image the way his father saw him. And he said, how could I do this? It's just a beautiful interpretation of how, what it could look like. I'm not going to get through reading this, so I prepared it beforehand. This is the most amazing article. I think every single parent should read it. I have a few things like this in my Yom Kippur Machzor. This is one of them. It just made it there recently. It's an article written by Eli Wiesel's son, the legendary Holocaust survivor, writer, author, Nobel laureate, also wasn't spared, you know, stuff with his children. And his son Elisha rebelled completely, and he talks about how his father never gave up on him. It's just such a beauty. Here's what he said. These are excerpts. I can't read this without breaking up. He said, be a good student, be a good son, be a good Jew. And I did the opposite. I raged against, see, it's not just religious parents. You think you're from your parents. It's life. People make different choices. My father could, story of the Baal Shem Tov. He writes that his father told him a story from the Baal Shem Tov. A chassid said that my son left Yiddishkeit, and the Rebbe said, love him even more. You got to read this yourself. Sorry, I can't. As I shouted at him that I wanted nothing to do with religion. And he said that his father always said, just be. Just be. That's why the title of this talk. Now, how could he love me when the disrespect was so severe? And the line of this story, I didn't write the negative part. Elisha wrote something that I hear often. Elisha wrote how a girlfriend of his came from a very educated home, and she did very, very well in school, but it was never enough for their parents. They always wanted better grades, and they were constantly, you did this, you should have done that. And he wrote about how it affected this girl throughout her life, throughout the years, way after she was an adult. And he said his father just accepted him for who he was. Read this. Look at this. I believe that he is still with me, still believe in me. Just be.